The music box was never the real threat. It was a doorway. And if that is true, then one of the most terrifying things that happened in From was not the appearance of the music box, the cicadas, or the nightmare creatures. It was the moment the town proved that it could attack people without ever touching their bodies. Because the music box did something the monsters had never done before. It entered the mind. It turned dreams into weapons. It made sleep dangerous. And once you realize that, an uncomfortable question appears. What if the music box was not a new supernatural force? What if it was the first visible sign of a much larger system that has been operating underneath the town from the beginning? That changes everything. Because the people trapped in this place have always believed there were separate mysteries. The monsters, the forest, the faraway trees, the tunnels, the voices, the children, the symbols, the dreams, the strange dates, the music box. But what if they are not separate mysteries at all? What if they are different parts of the same mechanism? And what if the music box was simply the first time the town showed everyone how that mechanism actually works? This is the theory. The town does not simply imprison bodies. It manipulates consciousness. And the music box was only the beginning. Look at what makes the music box so disturbing. It did not need doors. It did not need windows. It did not need talismans. It did not need to physically enter the town. It reached people while they were asleep. That distinction matters. Because sleep removes the one thing the survivors normally depend on. Awareness. During the day, they can barricade a house. They can carry weapons. They can use talismans. They can watch the forest. They can count the hours until sunset. But when someone sleeps, those defenses become almost meaningless. And this is where it gets darker. What if the town has always understood that? What if the monsters are only the most primitive form of the trap? They walk. They smile. They imitate people. They wait outside doors. They exploit trust. But they still have to physically reach you. The music box did not. It bypassed the physical world completely. That means the real battlefield may never have been the town streets. It may have been the minds of the people trapped there. And suddenly, old events begin to look different. Think about the visions that repeatedly appear in From. Why do different characters experience things that seem impossible? Why do some people see figures that others cannot see? Why do certain symbols appear again and again? Why do memories, dreams, hallucinations, and supernatural visions sometimes feel almost identical? Most importantly, why does the town seem to know exactly what will break a person? That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is whether the town is actually creating these experiences, or whether it is accessing something that already exists inside the victims. Because if the second possibility is true, the town has found the perfect weapon. It doesn't have to invent your nightmare. It only has to discover it. Look at the way fear works in this place. Everyone arrives carrying something invisible. Guilt, regret, grief, trauma, unfinished relationships, fear of failure, fear of death, fear of losing someone. And the supernatural forces of the town repeatedly seem capable of turning those weaknesses against them. That is not random. At least, it doesn't feel random. And this is the detail everyone missed. The town rarely attacks people in the simplest way possible. It attacks them psychologically first. The monsters don't merely kill. They talk. They smile. They imitate loved ones. They create hesitation. They make victims question what they're seeing. The voices don't simply provide information. They manipulate. The visions don't simply reveal answers. They create uncertainty. And the dreams don't simply frighten people. They leave consequences after waking. That pattern points toward one central idea. The supernatural force controlling this place may not care whether you are physically alive if it can control what you believe is real. And once the music box appeared, the rules became even more terrifying. Because now the enemy had access to a place where the survivors had no protection. Their dreams. But here's what changes everything. The music box itself may not have been the weapon. It may have been the interface. A signal. A symbol. A way for something deeper to communicate with the people trapped inside the town. Think about what a music box actually does. It produces the same sequence repeatedly. The melody returns. Again. and again, and again. That repetition is important, because From is obsessed with repetition. The same events seem to echo across generations. The same symbols return. The same fears return. The same questions return. People arrive. People investigate. People believe they are discovering something new. Then they realize someone may have already been there before them. And that creates a horrifying possibility. Maybe the town doesn't simply trap people. Maybe it cycles them. Maybe every generation is forced to reach the same discoveries, make the same mistakes, and approach the same hidden truth. Like a melody that keeps playing. The music box becomes a perfect symbol for that. A mechanism designed to repeat. And if the town itself operates like a music box, then the survivors are not necessarily players. They may be notes. Every person has a role. Every tragedy moves the melody forward. Every death changes the rhythm. Every discovery brings the system closer to its next phase. That would explain why certain events feel strangely connected even when they happen years apart. And it could explain something even more disturbing. Why the town seems to react when people get too close to the truth. Because perhaps the system has a threshold. The moment someone begins understanding the pattern, the environment changes. New visions appear. New threats emerge. Old mysteries suddenly become relevant. The rules begin shifting. And that means the supernatural forces may not simply be trying to kill the survivors. They may be trying to keep them from completing the pattern. Which brings us back to the music box. The survivors thought they had discovered a monster. But maybe they had discovered a mechanism. And if the mechanism still exists in another form, then destroying the music box would never have solved the problem. It would only have interrupted the melody. The song could start again somewhere else. With someone else. And this is where the theory becomes much more disturbing. What if the next evolution of the town's attack is not another physical monster? What if it is something that doesn't need a body at all? Something that can manipulate memory. Something that can alter perception. Something that can make two people remember the same event differently. Something that can make a survivor question whether a person ever existed. Because once the enemy can control dreams, the next logical step is controlling the boundary between dreams and memories. And if that boundary disappears, escaping the town becomes almost impossible. You could walk through a faraway tree. You could find a road out. You could open a door. But how would you know you actually escaped? That is the terrifying lesson of the music box. The strongest prison in From may not have walls. It may be the inability to trust your own mind. And if that is what the music box was preparing the survivors for, then season may 4th not be about discovering a new monster. It may be about discovering that the monsters were never the highest level of the threat. They were only the part everyone could see. The real enemy may be the system behind them. And the music box was simply the first time that system revealed its hand. But there is one final detail that makes this theory even more dangerous. If the music box was only the beginning, then what comes next? Because whatever is waiting beyond it may not want to kill the survivors. It may want something much worse. It may want them to forget why they are trapped there in the first place. The most dangerous thing about the music box was never the music. It was what happened after people heard it. Because once the survivors experienced the nightmare, the rules of the town changed. And that gives us the next piece of the theory. If the music box was an interface between the physical world and something deeper, then the town's supernatural forces may be operating in layers. The monsters occupy one layer. The visions occupy another. The dreams occupy another. And somewhere above all of them may be the force actually controlling the cycle. That would explain why destroying one threat never seems to solve anything. Remove one layer, another takes its place. But here's what changes everything. The music box did not behave like an ordinary creature. It behaved like a system. It created a repeating pattern. It trapped people inside a specific psychological experience. It connected separate victims. And most importantly, it continued to exist even when nobody could clearly understand what it wanted. That is completely different from the monsters outside the houses. The monsters have recognizable behavior. They hunt. They wait. They deceive. But the music box created rules. And rules are far more dangerous than monsters. Because a monster can be killed. A rule can survive forever. Think about the strange rules scattered throughout the town. Talismans work, but nobody fully understands why. Far away, trees work, but nobody controls where they lead. The caves exist beneath the town, but their purpose remains unclear. The symbol keeps appearing. The children appear in impossible places. The voices know things they should not know. And dreams repeatedly contain information that seems connected to reality. Individually, these things look like separate supernatural mysteries. But together, they look like components, like pieces of a machine. And that is why the music box matters so much. It may have been our first clear look at the machine itself. Not the whole machine, just one moving part. Now look at the characters who become connected to these supernatural events. Their experiences are never identical. That is important. If the town were simply producing hallucinations, you would expect random images. But the experiences often contain structure, symbols, locations, people, sounds, repeated imagery, and sometimes information that appears connected to events outside the person's immediate awareness. That raises a dangerous question. What if the visions aren't hallucinations? What if they are transmissions? Imagine the town as something capable of sending information into a human mind. The recipient doesn't receive a normal message. They receive fragments. A sound, a face, a symbol, a memory, a nightmare. Something they don't understand. Then they wake up and try to interpret it. And that's where the system becomes almost impossible to defeat. Because the survivors do the work themselves. The supernatural force provides the image. The human mind provides the meaning. Fear does the rest. That is psychological warfare. And the town seems very good at it. This is where certain characters become especially important. Victor has spent decades surrounded by impossible events. Yet one of the most fascinating things about Victor is not what he knows. It's what he doesn't remember. His relationship with memory has always been strange. He has survived for so long that forgetting may have become a form of protection. But what if forgetting isn't accidental? What if memory itself is part of the town's control system? Think about how often characters discover something they had forgotten. A drawing, a place, a person, a childhood memory, a symbol, a detail that suddenly becomes important years later. The town doesn't simply hide information. It appears to bury information inside people. And if that is intentional, then Victor's fragmented memories become much more significant. Maybe the town doesn't erase everything. Maybe it removes only what people need to remember in order to escape the cycle. That would make memory the ultimate battlefield. And suddenly, the music box looks less like a random supernatural object. It becomes the beginning of a pattern. First, the town attacks dreams. Then it attacks perception. Then memory becomes unreliable. And eventually, identity itself could become unstable. That is where this theory becomes terrifying. Because if the town can manipulate what you remember, it doesn't need to lock you inside a physical location. It can make you forget what freedom looked like. It can make you forget who you were. It can even make you forget that you ever wanted to leave. And that may explain one of the strangest patterns in the entire story. People who arrive in the town immediately want to escape. But over time, their priorities change. They become obsessed with surviving. Then they become obsessed with understanding. Then the mystery itself becomes their life. The town doesn't merely imprison them. It consumes their attention. And attention may be exactly what it needs. Look at the way every major discovery creates another question. Find the talismans. Now ask who made them. Discover the tunnels. Now ask who built them. Find the children. Now ask why they are trapped. See the symbol. Now ask what it means. Discover the dates. Now ask who lived through those years. Experience the music box. Now ask what exists beyond it. The answers never end. The mystery keeps generating itself, like a machine designed to keep people searching. And that may be the true purpose. Not keeping people physically trapped, keeping them psychologically engaged with the system. Because a person who stops searching might become dangerous. A person who understands the pattern might become even more dangerous. But a person who is constantly chasing answers? That person is predictable. And the town seems to thrive on predictable behavior. Now think about the monsters again. They don't simply attack randomly. They wait. They observe. They exploit predictable routines. They know when people leave buildings. They know how humans respond to familiar faces. They use patience as a weapon. What if that isn't simply animal behavior? What if they are following instructions? That would explain their strange restraint. They don't always rush. They don't behave like creatures driven purely by hunger. Sometimes they seem almost theatrical. They wait for fear to develop.
They speak.
They negotiate. They manipulate. They enjoy the psychological reaction. And that is exactly what makes them compatible with the music box theory. The monsters may not be the creators of the nightmare. They may be another expression of the same system. The music box attacks from inside. The monsters attack from outside. The result is the same. Isolation, fear, confusion, loss of control. And if both forces serve the same purpose, then the survivors have been fighting the wrong battle. They have been asking, how do we kill the monsters? Maybe the real question is, who needs the monsters? Because if something created the system, the creatures may only be tools. And tools can be replaced. This is why the music box was only the beginning. The moment the survivors discovered that supernatural forces could enter dreams, they should have realized something fundamental. The walls of the town were never the real boundary. The human mind was. And once that boundary was broken, every other mystery became more dangerous. A faraway tree is dangerous because you don't know where it will send you. A tunnel is dangerous because you don't know what is sleeping underneath. A vision is dangerous because you don't know whether it is a warning. But a manipulated memory is worse, because you don't even know that you have been manipulated. You trust your own mind. That is the one defense nobody thinks to question, until it fails. And this may be why the story keeps returning to the idea of remembering. Characters remember things at the exact moment they become necessary. Old events suddenly become relevant. Past generations seem connected to present events. The same symbols appear across different periods. The town feels less like a place moving forward and more like a place repeating itself. That brings us back to the music box. A repeating melody, a repeating cycle, a repeating nightmare. Maybe that wasn't symbolism. Maybe it was a warning. The survivors were listening to the town's rhythm without realizing it. And if the pattern repeats, then someone has played this melody before. Maybe many times. Which means the people in season May 4th not be the first group to reach this point. They may simply be the latest. And if the cycle has happened before, then somewhere in the town there may be evidence of previous attempts, previous failures, previous survivors, previous versions of the same story, which leads to the most disturbing possibility yet. What if the town isn't waiting for someone to escape? What if it is waiting for someone to complete something? Because a cycle doesn't repeat forever without a purpose. Something begins it, something sustains it, and eventually something is supposed to happen. The music box may have marked the moment when that process became visible. But if it was only the beginning, then season 4 could be revealing the next stage. Not another monster. Not another nightmare. Something deeper. Something capable of changing the rules themselves. And if that happens, the survivors may discover that the worst thing about the town isn't that nobody knows how to leave. It's that someone may already know exactly when they are supposed to. The music box was never the final mystery. It was the warning that the rules were changing. And if we follow everything we have seen to its darkest conclusion, the terrifying possibility is this. The town may not be trying to keep people trapped forever. It may be preparing them for something. Because look at the pattern. Every time the survivors think they have identified the enemy, another layer appears. They learn about the monsters. Then they discover the tunnels. They learn about the talismans. Then they discover that protection has limits. They learn about the faraway trees. Then they realize escape does not mean control. They discover the symbol. Then the mystery becomes connected to memory, history, and previous inhabitants. And eventually, the music box reveals something even more disturbing. The enemy doesn't have to remain outside. It can enter the victim. That is the turning point. Because once the supernatural force can cross into dreams, the difference between reality and illusion becomes almost meaningless. And that changes how we should interpret every future vision. A vision may not be a warning. It may be an instruction. A nightmare may not be an attack. It may be a test. A memory may not belong to the person remembering it. And a familiar face may not actually be the person standing in front of you. But here's what changes everything. If the town can manipulate perception, then the most important characters may not be the strongest people. They may be the people who remember. That makes Victor's role even more important. Victor has survived longer than almost anyone. He has seen patterns repeat. He has experienced things that other characters are only beginning to understand. But Victor's greatest strength may not be his knowledge. It may be the fact that he has learned not to trust the obvious explanation. He hides things. He draws things. He remembers fragments. He protects himself through routines. At first, that can look like trauma. But within this theory, it becomes something else. A survival strategy. If the town can manipulate memory, then forgetting certain things might actually keep you alive. Victor may have unconsciously learned that remembering too much is dangerous, because knowledge attracts attention. And that could explain why his drawings are so important. A drawing doesn't depend on perfect memory. It preserves an image outside the mind, something that cannot be altered as easily. That makes Victor's drawings more than simple records. They could be external memories, evidence against whatever force is trying to control perception. And that gives us a completely different interpretation of the town symbols. Maybe the symbols aren't simply messages. Maybe they are anchors, objects, images, and patterns that allow human beings to recognize something they have forgotten. That would explain why the same imagery keeps returning. The town can distort memory, but repetition makes certain memories harder to erase. The survivors keep seeing the same symbols because the system keeps trying to communicate through the same channels. Or because the people trapped inside it have encountered the same truth before. And if that's true, the music box fits perfectly. The melody repeats because the cycle repeats. The nightmare returns because the process isn't finished. The survivors experience different versions of the same terror because the system is testing different ways to break them. That means the music box was not necessarily designed to kill. It was designed to demonstrate control. It showed the survivors, we can reach you anywhere. And that message is far more frightening than any monster. Because once you understand that, you realize the talismans may never have been absolute protection. They protect a physical space. But what protects the mind? What protects a memory? What protects a dream? What protects a person's sense of reality? Nothing. And this is where it gets darker. Imagine the town eventually reaching the point where nobody can agree on what happened. One person remembers a door. Another remembers a window. Someone remembers a person who never existed. Someone else remembers a death that never happened. And both believe they are telling the truth. At that point, the town doesn't need to stop anyone from escaping. It simply needs to make them unable to recognize the way out. That may be the real purpose of psychological manipulation in From. Confusion is not a side effect. Confusion is the prison. And suddenly, the entire story can be viewed through one terrifying question. What if the town's biggest weapon is not fear? What if it is uncertainty? Fear makes you run. Uncertainty makes you hesitate. And hesitation is exactly what the monsters exploit. The smile at the window. The familiar voice outside the door. The strange figure in the forest. The unexplained vision. The impossible memory. The person who appears where they should not be. Every one of these things creates the same reaction. Can I trust what I'm seeing? And once that question enters your mind, the town is already one part of the battle. Now consider the possibility that the music box was simply the first successful experiment. If the town discovered that dreams could be manipulated, why would it stop there? The next step would be memory, then perception, then identity, and eventually choice. Because the ultimate form of control is not forcing someone to do something. It is making them believe they chose to do it. That would completely reframe the behavior of certain characters. What if some decisions that look irrational are actually influence decisions? What if someone is being guided toward a location without realizing it? What if certain characters are not discovering clues independently? What if they are being led? And this is the detail everyone missed. The town rarely gives complete answers. It gives just enough information to make someone take the next step. A vision, a voice, a symbol, a coincidence, a strange encounter, then another. The survivor connects the dots. But who placed the dots there? That's the real mystery. Because if someone is controlling the sequence of discoveries, then the investigation itself may be part of the trap. The survivors may believe they are solving the mystery, but the mystery may be solving them. Learning their fears, learning their weaknesses, learning who they trust, learning what they will sacrifice, and perhaps determining who is capable of reaching the final stage. That would explain why the town seems obsessed with certain individuals. Some people see more. Some remember more. Some hear more. Some are repeatedly pulled toward the supernatural. That may not be coincidence. They may be the people the system needs. And if that is true, then the town's goal may not be random suffering. It may be selection, testing, preparation, a process designed to identify the person capable of completing the cycle. Which brings us back to the music box one final time. Why a music box? Why not a normal creature? Why not a simple hallucination? Because a music box is built around repetition. You wind it, it plays. The melody ends. Then you wind it again. The melody returns. That is the town. Something winds it. Something starts the cycle. People arrive. People suffer. People discover clues.
People die.
Someone remembers. Someone forgets. And then the cycle begins again. The music box wasn't telling us what the town was. It was showing us how the town works. And if that interpretation is correct, then the survivors have been staring at the answer without recognizing it. They don't need to destroy every monster. They don't need to understand every symbol. They don't even necessarily need to find every door. They need to find whoever or whatever is winding the box. Because if they can stop that mechanism, the cycle may finally break. But there's a problem. What if the person winding the box is not outside the town? What if the mechanism is inside one of the survivors? What if every generation carries a piece of it? A memory, a role, a connection, a forgotten identity. And what if the town has been waiting for someone to remember exactly who they are? That would make the final mystery brutally simple. The question isn't, how do they escape? It's, why were they chosen? Because if the music box was only the beginning, then the next stage of the story is not about surviving the nightmare. It's about discovering the purpose of the nightmare. And that is where everything we thought we knew about the town could collapse. The monsters may not be the masters. The visions may not be random. The dreams may not be dreams. The symbols may not be warnings. And the music box may not have been a weapon at all.
It may have been a key.
A key that opened the first door into the real system controlling the town. And if Season 4 continues following that pattern, the next revelation could be the most disturbing one yet. The people trapped in From may not be prisoners waiting to escape. They may be participants in a cycle that has been running for generations. And someone somewhere may already be preparing to play the next song. So when the next impossible vision appears, when another forgotten memory suddenly returns, and when the survivors hear something familiar coming from somewhere it should not be, remember the music box. Because the first melody already played. The terrifying question is whether the final note has even begun.